Today we begin a series called Stories of Valor here in Dare County, and feel very privileged and honored to have Kevin Wallace and his wife Lauren Wright Wallace here with us today. They're doing really good work. Looking forward to talking to them and conveying to you the story of the Van of Valor and just some great stories about the heritage of wartime service here, our Purple Heart recipients specifically, and the great heritage that we have here in Dare County. We've had a front row seat for every war this nation's ever fought, and I'm looking so forward to talking to both of you a little bit about that. So Kevin, let's start with you here. What's your background?
Military background or just in general?
Sure, yeah, personal and military.
Well, I grew up in a town kind of similar to Manio on the west coast called Cayucas, small town, under 1,000 people. Every restaurant, every store is mom and pop, so which made Manio feel so familiar and home for me. So growing up there, surfing, fishing, kind of the same lifestyle I would have had I grown up here. And I was preparing for a surf competition when I was young. I was probably about 12 or 13. And then I twisted my ankle, couldn't do it. So my dad had an old Minolta camera, 35 millimeter. And I thought, okay, if I can't surf, I'm going to photograph it. The photographs were absolutely terrible. So then I was hooked though. I'm like, well, why are they terrible? How do I make them better? So I got hooked into photography. Fast forward till a little bit after 9/11, the military was looking at, well, I think the government in general was looking at, there's no way we're going to lose these wars militarily, but we could lose them by public opinion. So I got force retrained into public relations, public affairs they call it. Then I specifically went into combat camera, and when I was wounded, received the Purple Heart, it was in the capacity of combat camera. I was working around some Army Cav Scouts and forward observers, and then there was a MARSOC, a Marine Corps Special Operations unit there, and then some Afghan commandos. But it was all in the capacity of documenting the mission. I had a rifle, but my job there was to be the cameraman.
Very cool.
So
Very
that's
cool.
a long progression into what got me in up to the day I was wounded.
Yes,
into
sir.
today.
Yeah.
I still.
And I'd like to talk to you about that a little bit here later. But talk to us a little bit about what it meant to go into the military. We hear these stories, it was my sworn duty, and yes, that's very true. But personally, what was going on with you that decided, okay, I'm going to enlist?
Yeah.
What drove that?
Well, I'm not proud to say it, and I've heard controversy from college professors who proclaim this, but for me it really was, my grades in high school were terrible. There was no way I was going to college. I didn't see myself destined for that. So it was opportunity. It was a place where an enlisted person could get taught anything from basic rifleman skills to very advanced technical skills, depending on the branch and your scores when you enlist and stuff. So it was kind of, for me, a fresh slate. And then later I went back to college, but at that time it was, I wouldn't say my only option, but if I was going to stay out of trouble, it was probably my only option.
Kind of, would you say that it helped define you as a person when you're young and you go into the military and you're kind of all over the place? But did it bring you direction? Did it fulfill the purpose that you wanted military service to do for you?
It almost always did, but I always felt like I could do more. And I think it was like a feedback loop, as I don't know how patriotic I was when I enlisted. I mean, I loved this country, and I was proud of my father, my stepfather, my uncles, my grandparents, everyone's efforts in the Pacific and in Europe in World War II. That's about as far back as I know of history, but grandparents, Purple Heart recipients as well. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So it's
very amazing.
So it's there, and I feel like, though, when I was in, I would see people who were sacrificing more, you know. It was like they were giving everything to it, it felt like. And I always wanted, okay, how do I get into that unit? How do I get with these people? So it was, I don't know. So to answer your question, not quite, but it just pushed me farther and farther and farther. And then when I got this unique privilege to tell the stories of some of these men and women, I wasn't really happy about the forced retrain, but as soon as I wrapped my head around what I would be doing, oh my gosh, it was an incredible opportunity.
Right, a job worth doing is a job worth doing well,
Yes,
kind
sir.
of thing. Let's talk a little bit about the day that you received the incident that led up to your Purple Heart.
Okay.
Just talk to me and let's.
Okay. So we were in a valley called Bala Murghab in Baghdad province in northwest Afghanistan. There was main way the Taliban was funding their war against us was drug export. So we had closed down over the course of several years, mostly Marines and British Army had choked off their drug exfil routes through the south, through Helmand and down that way. So they were coming across the Iranian border in like Farah and Herat province, and we had all but closed that off. So they had one route really up into Turkmenistan to export their opium. So they weren't going to let that valley go easy, you know. So we had a fight ahead of us, and the valley was in a really long, narrow. Actually, it looked like the Outer Banks. It was just a very long, narrow stretch with mountains on both sides, mined for going back to before Russia. And it was like a very volatile, very dangerous valley. They started calling it the Valley of Death. But we had seized control over about, I would say, 60% of the valley. But up to the north, they called it, well, in the south, it was called Hell's Gate, and that was something that was very contested for a while, but we had secured that. But up in the north, leading up to the Turkmenistan border, the Taliban had just assumed a massive amount of people. And we knew that, but we weren't sure exactly how many. So on that day, there was a couple of operations going on. I don't think, probably I should talk about what the MARSOC's mission was there, but the scouts, the CAV mission was to do a key leader engagement, and it was really to meet with the elders in this village and provoke them and see what the response would be. I don't mean that we, as Americans, go around provoking it, but we knew these were Taliban. We knew these were bad guys. And so it was kind of, so we set up outside this village, and we took an old set of dilapidated ruins, you know, so some of the walls were about maybe a foot high, some of them were about 4 foot high, and it was broke up into 3 rooms, this old house. So we set that up as our our observation post anyway. They figured out we were there some point over that night, and the next morning we went to, we sent I was part of a group of 4 that went through the night before with a bomb dog, and we hadn't sniffed out any booby traps or anything like that. So the next morning we went through, and then the dog Valdo was alerted to one, so they had put something that we missed, or I don't think he would have missed it the night before, so they had put it there that morning, which kind of diverted us, which felt like, okay, this isn't good, but we had to meet, their lieutenant had to meet with this elder. So we were there, and it was all, I don't know, you could see when, well, you're in politics, you know when a meeting's going well, then you know when it's going not well. Well, this was like, they were spitting, there was a behavior that among Afghan men are very disrespectful, and they wouldn't do it unless, you know, so it was going very, very, very not well. And then I could see on the rooftops of these buildings, they were starting to like pass up PKMs, Russian machine guns and stuff. So bring that to the lieutenant's attention, and we got to go. We couldn't make it back that way, so we had to go across this field that we hadn't swept for mines or anything. But as we're getting across this field, we just start taking a massive amount of fire from the back. And I think there was like 5 of us there. But we got across this field, got back into the ruins, and then we're just, you know, fire back and forth. And then it lets up, kicks off again, lets up. This went on for several hours. We were running pretty low on ammunition, and we couldn't get, and also we had some wounded already at that time, but we couldn't get any, airdrops or any ammo drops or a QRF out to us yet because the terrain as it was, there was no way to get to us.
Very dicey situation
Very
across
dicey.
the board.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and Intel was now telling us from air that there was like 100 to 125 of them. There was 11 of us. And so they started hitting our position back to back with RPGs. And the room I was in was, as I looked at them from the far left, but I had moved out of that room a few times for some other close encounters when Taliban had, snuck up on our position at one point and different things. But at the time when these RPGs were coming, that's where I was. And they had hit like where the mud ruin was, like with an RPG right there, and that just crumbled. And there was the dog, Valdo, its handler, a guy named Petty Officer Ryan Lee, Army Sergeant Jeff Shepard, Army PFC Ben Bradley, and myself were in that room. And so it was at this point like a lot of spraying and praying, really, because there was just RPGs like hitting. There was no way to get out. It was pretty clear that they were dialed onto our position now. That's kind of how RPG, targeting works once you're dialed on. So we knew we had to get out of there, and we're grabbing our stuff, anything that we couldn't leave behind. And we're about to move when an RPG comes in and it like whizzes over my shoulder.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like I had a beard going and it singed it. It was so close. And if I was tall as like the average man, I would have taken it to the chest. So lucky I was short. But anyway, it went over my shoulder and hit in the ground behind me. And when it exploded, unfortunately, Valdo took a lot of that, the dog. But his handler was wounded. Everyone in the room
Sure.
was.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of got blasted off my feet forward, and I kind of lost consciousness for a moment, and then I could hear when I came to, like my vision was because kind of coming back, and I could hear Shepard, Jeff screaming, medic, God damn it, we need a medic. Sorry for the language, but that's a direct quote. And I could hear chaos, so I knew we were all, well, I wasn't sure we were all alive, but I knew I was alive. I knew Jeff was alive. I'm pretty much laying on top of Ben. I think he's alive. My other combat camera buddy, John Pearl, was on the video in the next room. He was coming to help us through, so I was wondering if he was alive. I couldn't see, there was so much smoke and dust. But I thought maybe Valdo and Ryan Lee back there was no way they survived it. It was... But they both did,
Amazing.
Which was incredible.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, and then we had 4 more hours of fighting, and then we had to fight our way into the canal, and they were in the canal too, and it was, we had to, and then Kerry Valdo, he survived too, but he was really blown up bad, but, and then, we had like another 4 hours of fight. Then once we got back to the combat outpost, we could get some helicopters in there to medevac Valdo and Jeff and some of the more seriously wounded, but then we had to take the fight back, or we would be seen, it would be a huge moral victory for them, and that would just, that seems just how they recruit, so there's no way we could have lost, we couldn't, so we regrouped, they went back out when I was in the aid station, actually. I was being patched up, and I came out in the vehicle, they had vehicles now, we were all on foot before, they were rolling out. And I was kind of angry because I wanted to be on there. And there was an Afghan National Army. They rode around in the ANA in these little like Toyota trucks with a 50 cal in the back. It was kind of cool. But they weren't armored or anything. And they were heading out. And I jumped in the back of their truck. And the Americans don't normally do that. They're like, what's going on? Like, just go. And then we were heading up, and they got some call because there was like a lot of RPGs coming at our vehicles up there. And without armor, they got called back. So I was bummed, so I didn't get to go out on the
But you took the fight right back to them, despite the condition that you were in.
Yep.
The other guys, I mean,
Heroes.
thank goodness.
Yeah,
it's difficult for, I think, regular people who have not experienced anything like that to even comprehend, you were a nanosecond from being a statistic.
Oh, yeah.
And if you would, just can you convey some of the mental aspect? Are you in survival mode? Are you, how do you deal with it? I guess you have to push the emotions to the side, but
Yeah.
where did you draw the mental strength to deal with the situation you were in? I mean, it was a fight with.
Well, yeah, it's you look around and all of these guys, their life is as valuable, or some of them are younger and what I perceived as more intelligent and have more to give to the world, so are more valuable than mine. Like, and I don't know if this is just me or if it's how other airmen and sailors have felt when they're working directly with the Army or the Marine Corps, but there's an extra element of you feel like you always have to prove yourself a little bit extra. And I'm not, that might just be me. I'm not sure if this is a statistic or not, but for me, it was a lot of that too. I didn't want to ever be a burden on anyone else, So when I was wounded, it was a little bit like I was thinking, oh crap, like how am I gonna, I can't have someone carrying me.
Yeah, I don't want to let anybody down.
Yeah.
Hearing you explain this just absolutely marvelous, amazing story that, you guys depended on each other. It was not necessarily you, but it was the group.
Mm-hmm.
You were all for one and one for all, so to speak, not to just to borrow something from the Three Musketeers kind of thing. But the fact that you have the strength of others to draw on, that. Can you jump into that for a little bit? I mean, you guys, you still know these guys' names.
Yeah.
You knew the dog, but it's what the dog, all these technical things that you were trained for, and when the training kicks in. But just talk a little bit, if you would, and Lauren, we're going to jump right over to you. This is such a fascinating story. But talk to a little bit about your group there. You said there were 4, there were 5. The other camera guy you were working with a lot, but
Yeah.
had you been involved with these guys before? Was this a standing group? You knew these guys, Bradley and Shepard, and.
Actually, there was 2 platoons of these scouts, one in the north part of the valley, the other in the south. I knew the ones in the south very, very well. I had been working with these guys maybe a week when this, maybe a week when this happened. So it was, but I knew of them all from their brothers down south. We would hear what was going on the other side of the valley. We were just geographically displaced and not in a position to help. In the center of the valley, there was a forward operating base that was run mostly by Italians, and that's where MARSOC was, and that's where our troop, which is like a company and a cav unit, was. The command and stuff were there, but there was no like air support. It was not like, it was just a small base. So getting air support was always a challenge up there, and because of that, I don't want to disparage any NATO ally, but they had different reasons to be in the war than we did, I think, and they committed their efforts in different ways. I'll just leave it at that. So sometimes it felt like we were on our own out there.
Absolutely. Again, fascinating just aspects of this story, this conversation that we're having. I don't think people, I was probably guilty of this as anybody, but you're not in an area with a bunch of palm trees. There's not a Dollar General half a mile down the road. All it is rocks and dirt. Can you just kind of explain the terrain a little bit? I mean, it's kind of like being on the moon with mountains, I guess.
Well, yeah, in the south it definitely was. Up there it was very rugged, rocky. It kind of like the Rocky Mountains without the beautiful trees, and you have the rivers and stuff, but there wasn't many trees. Up on the tops of the mountains there were, but it was really rocky, boulderish terrain with one river that ran through the center, so they had dug canals. But this particular valley is interesting that they've never had a power grid. It's not that they were once, like Kabul was once a civilized society before the rise of the Taliban, but this place had never been conquered, and there was 4 different languages spoken there. they were at war with each other constantly. They didn't even know they were in Afghanistan, as we would come to learn for a lot of the people. They never had a school. Our interest in that valley started when a Spanish provincial reconstruction team in like 2008 or something went to build a school that the Taliban blew up like a week after they were done. So some of our 82nd guys had to go help bail out the Spanish, and then two of the paratroopers, 82nd guys, got killed, and that snowball effect brought a lot of attention on that valley. But that was, I think, in 2007 or 8.
It's probably a reason why that area is about as primitive as there is on the earth. I mean, it's not a place you go to that you, unless you're I think of the Bedouin people on the deserts and stuff, kind of very similar. It's not a place people aspire to move to. Oh, Kevin, this is fantastic, and thank you for that, and we'll get back to some of this. Lauren, let's talk a little bit about your background.
So I'm an Army brat. My dad was in the Army my whole life, and so I was born in Savannah, Georgia, but at the age of 1 moved over to Aschaffenburg, Germany, where I lived there until I was 4. And then I lived at Great Lakes Naval Training Center. My dad was an Army recruiter up there, trying to get people. It's like, oh, you grew up around the Navy? Well, here, join the Army. So then after that, I came to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I spent the majority of my time. And then I got admitted into East Carolina, where I'm a graduate of. And in that time, I became a cultural anthropologist. So how you were explaining, like, you can't exactly say that you're a full historian. When you try to explain things because of the academic side behind that, you can get away with that in anthropology. By telling people stories, that is straight up cultural anthropology and recording history. And so that's what led to...
The Outer Banks is a great fit for you.
Yes. I came out here, I was part of ECU's first group of students to study over at CSI. Back in 2020 is when it first happened. So I was here when COVID hit the first time.
Oh my gosh.
And I got kicked off the island. I didn't have a driver's license at the time. So I had a letter from the sheriff that allowed me to come back. And so for some reason, I just kept coming back. There's something magical about here. And
well then, how did Kevin and Lauren, what started this?
So back when Wabi Sabi was still open, I rolled sushi there for a period of time. And it was one Thursday night trivia where we had brushed wings a couple of times. We'd known of each other. But then when we were both single, he came up and wrote his phone number on my trivia card and said, text or call me, and walked away. And then we were on a date 2 days later and have been inseparable 4 years, 4 years now.
Wow, that is just absolutely fantastic. Okay, great. Thank you, Lauren. So here we are. We've got this van. That's quite a story there. It's not like you went out and bought something that's straight off the lot. Talk a little bit about about this. I don't want to call it a project. That's probably not the word. It really is a labor. It's a labor of love. It's something. It's a way for you to give back to what you were doing. It had obviously your military background, and in your background as an Army brat. I'm an Army brat as well. But what precipitated this? All right, we're going to go get a van. We're going to bring Sonny along. We're young, you know. What's going on here?
Shall I?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so we were at an event in Dayton, Ohio, specifically for Purple Heart recipients and Gold Star families. There's also some first responders and things, but the charter of the nonprofit that does it, Blue Skies for Good Guys and Gals, that's their audience, is Gold Star families and Purple Heart recipients. So it's this really cool event they have up in Dayton every year that I've been a part of for a long time now.
Love Dayton.
Yeah. Well, very, very close connections to here, obviously. And yeah, a good friend of mine, former Ranger, runs it, and his brother owns a skydiving team up there, which is the largest in the country, Fast Tracks. So they put on this event every year, and I hadn't been in several years because I live in Paradise now, and it's just hard to leave. But I thought Lauren needs to meet some of these people that are like another side of my family, right? So we went up just to, well, we wanted to go up just to participate, but we were behind the power curve. But like, as I said, my buddy owns it, so a little bit of nepotism. He's like, well, pitch me what we can employ you to do while you're here, and then maybe it'll work. I'm like, well, we can. So we had this great idea. We had, like, we see people spray painting when we go, like, especially like in Europe, like street artists and stuff, and we know there's therapy in art. So we had this idea, what if we get like a tent that has heavy ventilation and we let people Bluetooth to their own music and go in there, and whether that's throwing paint at a canvas or spray painting, and we had the things and all for them to wear, the PPE, but what if we just let people go in this tent and express themselves art as in the evenings while they're sitting around the campfire? So that's what we did, and it was just a complete success. And we were thinking, like, and by the way, we had just bought the van, thinking we weren't sure what we were going to do with the next chapter of our life, and we were living out of the van, and it was pretty uncomfortable. It was like we were sweating every night and stuff when everyone else was in AC, but we thought this kind of was part of the experience, and we were seeing like happiness, or at least, I don't know, trauma processing happening in these veterans
There's
and
a
these
common
children.
theme here, therapy. And
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so we're like, we got to do something more. And then Lauren wanted to bring a bit of that, what we saw in Dayton, the respect for the veterans here. So she proclaimed Roanoke Island as the first Purple Heart Island, which was, as you know,
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, it was pretty-
yeah, so then she's like, well, we got to do, what about so-and-so Illinois or so-and-so Utah? I don't know. We've got to tell these stories. And we thought, well, why don't we start at home and then like convert that stupid van we bought, which has 310,000 miles on it, and let's just ride it and drive
Bad
it until it
tires.
dies. Yeah, it does. It's in bad shape.
Outer Banks limo.
Yeah, yeah. But let's just drive it till it's dead, and let's go to all the lower 48, anywhere we can drive to, and tell the story of at least 2 Purple Heart recipients or Gold Star families in each state. So now we have this directory of Purple Heart recipients, and we're trying to figure out our route around the country, but we want to just do it until we create a book that could be like, what do you call it? Like a
Coffee table
like
size
thing.
and style.
Yeah, and document these stories and help connect that Purple Heart Trail that we're now the first, island.
declared island.
So I think there's something there, and it's mostly Lauren's idea, but she has all the good ideas, and I just help.
Lauren, why don't you weigh in? That does it. Being somebody with creative background and thinks of the beauty and the design of things. So you've been over by the courthouse. You've seen that. What kind of clicked on this Purple Heart Island?
Well, while we were up in Ohio, I had heard the stories of a couple of people, like when Dayton was declared a Purple Heart city, and the efforts that they were able to include after it was named that, and just the attention brought to it. So I snooped around the internet trying to figure out if there were any other declared Purple Heart islands, and I couldn't find any. There were Purple Heart counties, towns. Virginia's a Purple Heart state. You see the sign as
Sure.
soon as you cross the border. But I was like, Roanoke Island has been the first, and the Outer Banks in general has been the first for so many things. Why not become the first island? And so I got in contact with the Purple Heart Trail coordinator, and he approved my proclamation before I brought it before the commissioners. And yeah, they were just waiting on the signature. And then after we got that from you guys, they're in the process of making the signs now.
Fantastic. They say the Outer Banks. I mean, everybody's here because they want to be here. And I guess we kind of fancy ourselves as pirates, even though there are a lot of local families that are descended from some pretty nefarious characters. And you guys are obviously fitting into that same mold. Talk to us a little bit about some of you're looking for Purple Heart recipients in this area, but there's so many interesting people. We were talking about Mr.
Yes.
Beasley over in Collington and others. Are you finding what you need here before you really get out?
Well, just on Wednesday this week, we had our first Purple Heart interview with Mr. Thomas Beasley. Thomas Higgins, sorry. And his story was absolutely fantastic. So I think in addition to recording our Purple Heart stories, that'll be the focus of our coffee table style book. But we're going to be accumulating interviews and stories from people along the way, and we're going to be storing them away. Not sure how yet we're going to involve them, but just as long as people are willing to tell their stories, we'll be happy to listen and record them, especially as it pertains to our veterans who have been who have had combat experience, because the real stories are not just this battle happened here, this happened here, and the basics of history. The true lessons of war are what's between the lines, and it's the experiences, and that's what we need to record, or else history is doomed to repeat itself.
100 stories sounds like a very ambitious goal, but each one of those, as you embark on this amazing journey, each one is specific. Each one is
Yes.
very cool. There's not going to be any weak stories. You got quite a tiger by the tail here, and wish you well. I thank you for your service, not just on the Veterans Advisory Council, but just be in an area that understands the Outer Banks, that understands military service, the commitment, the drain, the emotional drain, what it does to families. I mean, you've been all over the place. You know, about the time you make new friends, you're going to have to go make some other friends. So thank you for that. I mean, it's and everybody you talk to is going to say, I would trust that the local population here is going to be very grateful for this project here. What do you see? How can people help you? Is it a function of money? I mean, nothing comes cheap.
It definitely. We have a website, and you could find it by people can find it by Googling Van of Valor, but
vanofvalor.com.
Yes,
Very
sir.
cool. All right.
And we're trying to obviously fundraise for this event.
Sure.
We're selling what we can, what we could liquidate to help fund as much of it we can. But travel, even if we're living in a van, there's always fees you have to pay in the parks and stuff, anywhere between $10 and $30 a night. So and then gas and just the whole enchilada. It'll be quite expensive. So we're looking for anyone who's willing to help, and also we're open to sponsorship if someone wants to stick a big magnet on the side of the van and help us along the way. But I think mostly it's going to grow traction on its own, unlike our tires, no pun intended. But I think it's like what we're seeing here is tremendous, and we've just started. And I imagine if the van is rolling on to, let's just say, South Carolina next, so it'll be another part of the state, and then say South Carolina, Virginia, or Tennessee. I'm not sure which way we're going to go next, but wherever we are next, as that starts to build momentum, I think social media and stuff, people will be interested, and we'll just continue to evolve an email blast list for those who are not on social media, and just keep people updated on what we're doing. And I think the story will end up telling itself. We'll do the hard work, and we'll sweat in the van with Sonny for a year. But if we can do it in a year, I hope we can. I think we can. But our intent is just to keep going until the van dies, or we're out of money, or we're done, and that's the ultimate goal.
You have embraced the Outer Banks. I mean, you could have embraced anywhere. I know Fayetteville's not that far for you, Lauren, and you're a surf dude growing up. I mean, that's the culture that's here. Having been down in Hatteras all these years, but it's not just Hatteras. I mean, people, when Christmas is over with, nothing's open because they're all in Costa Rica, they're all in Nicaragua, all chasing. So the area obviously attracted you too.
Yeah.
And I probably answered my own question there. But anything you want to say about are you glad that you did this year?
Yeah, and I will say that before I moved here, when I did, like everyone's going to do research, of course, crime's really low and opportunity, there's plenty of opportunity. But one thing I noticed that could be intimidating to people was that there's a stiff divide between who's local and who's not. But what struck me is even the families, people we meet who have been here for generations, are so open and welcoming to us and invite us in, and some of the warmest people I've met anywhere. So if people are listening and you're not from here, don't believe what you read online, because these are some of the nicest people I've ever encountered. Sorry, you are some of the nicest people I ever encountered. I think Outer Banks people are amazing.
Yes. The area changes so much. It's such a dynamic. Nothing stays static here. Certainly not the geology.
Yeah.
But you know, that's a very, very apt description of. It's just a big stew. It's just a big stew of people who are here for different reasons. But everybody who's here wants to be here. Yeah. Kevin, appreciate you, man.
Thank you, sir.
Lauren, great story. Great story.